Yeah, welcome everybody. We have an exciting conversation for you this evening. Hope to shed some light. Part of this is a pre-convention town hall, so it's in the lead up to DSA's national convention. National convention can often be extremely, oriented towards the anal retentive and obsessive, who have time to read tens of thousands of pages of resolutions, and not much time, unfortunately, can sometimes be not as productive as we might like for a moment to reflect on the left, on our time, on our organization, on how we want to intervene. So that was sort of the idea behind this town hall, is to do that. And I'm really excited for all the panelists to speak to that tonight. I wanted to ourselves as NYC-DSA co-chairs, just say like a couple of quick things to maybe set the stage, get us all thinking in a common way about some of the things that are so like characteristic and special and worth thinking through where they're headed about our moment that we're living in. And I came up with three. So the three I have, it turns out I recently read a biography of Michael Harrington, and every time he gave a speech with three things. And I'm like, damn, good idea. So I have three things. The three things, number one is I believe we are living through the crisis of neoliberal capitalism. What that means and how that resolves is unclear. But I think we are living through a period where elites have no confidence in a program that they had confidence in for about 50 years. Where there are huge unexpected political outcomes that no one sees coming, that there's mass dissatisfaction with the available options on offer. But as Antonio Gramsci, the great Marxist, said about what he called the interregnum, meaning a period between regimes, Gramsci said the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. So that's one. Point one, I think we're living through the crisis of neoliberal capitalism. Point two, democratic socialism has a distinct place in US politics. I want to say for those of us who've been on the left for a long time, this is a huge departure from what the world was like about 10 years ago in the United States. It's really a huge departure from what the world was like at any point during the neoliberal period, and really possibly even before, possibly arguably since like the 30s, there hasn't been a distinct place for a radical left in sort of mainstream, both electoral and movement and sort of social politics. It's very different. There were 50 socialist politicians at a recent event that National DSA held, elected officials, over 50. And our orientation, there's a clear separation of us from the far right and from corporate Democrats. That said, our base is somewhat restricted, and some of our panelists, I think, are going to talk about that tonight. My favorite kind of term for our base is graduates without a future. Don't worry, I include myself in that. And it's also worth emphasizing that though we have a distinctive politics and a distinctive place, it is still a quite small place. Even in Albany, where we have a mighty force of socialists in office, it's likely that the right wing of the Democratic Conference outnumbers us maybe by 2 or 3 times. Finally, point three, we know we have to build organization. I think, again, for those of people who were around a little of the left before this time, that's somewhat of a departure. For those of us who went through kind of the big horizontalist period, Occupy, there was kind of a doubt about whether leadership, organization, these kinds of things were worth paying attention to if they mattered. I think that actually that question has mostly been settled on the left, and I think for the better, that people pay a lot of attention. There's kind of a will to organize. But we do have to wonder, and are we capable of lasting? How can we nurture and care for our organizations and make sure they last the kind of time we need to build power? So those are my three: crisis of neoliberal capitalism, democratic socialism has a distinct place, and we know we have to build organization. And I thought that was just like hopefully a common lingua franca that will help us in our discussion tonight. I'm going to hand it over to Ghislaine to introduce our panelists.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Please. I think that's an extremely apt grounding for us in this conversation too, as we're on the precipice of a really exciting new stage of the American left, where we see the labor movement really growing, not just in New York City, but nationally, as we're coming up upon maybe a teamsters strike, right? So a lot of us in this chapter are preparing for that. Nationally, we're preparing for those things. And we have a lot of great voices in the room and on Zoom with us today for our panelists. On Zoom, we have Max Elbaum, and I'll be reading through very briefly. Max Elbaum has been active in radical politics since the 1960s and is the author of Revolution in the Air, a history of the new communist movement in which he participated. He is on the editorial board of Convergence magazine and writes a regular column titled It Is Happening Here. To my right, we have Sophia Guimarães Cutler. Is that correct? Thank you. Sophia is a member of the National Political Committee of DSA and the Bread and Roses Caucus. She is also a grad worker at Yale, where she is a rank and file member of Unite Here Local 33 and writes about American labor history. And to my left, we have Isaac D. Isaac is a professional, Isaac is a professional trail worker, and amateur socialist living in Crown Heights, Brooklyn in the house. He is a tenant activist and writes and records podcasts for Cosmonaut magazine and helps out with New York City DSA's night school. And he is a member of the Marxist Unity Group, hence the t-shirt. And we also have Renee Paradis. Renee is a civil rights attorney from Northern California. She helped build New York's electoral program and then joined East Bay DSA, helping establish DSA's first statewide organization, California DSA. She is a candidate for DSA's National Political Committee at convention this year, running with the Socialist Majority Caucus slate. No t-shirt that I know of at the moment. And last but certainly not least, Sarah Hana Shrestha. Sarah Hana is a Democratic Socialist politician and activist who is a member of the New York State Assembly, representing New York's 103rd State Assembly District, which includes Kingston in upstate New York. She worked closely on the Public Power campaign as a Mid-Hudson Valley DSA member, who are also kindly co-sponsoring tonight's town hall, and helped to bring BPRA over the finish line in her time during office. So cheers to all of our panelists. Yes, yes, yes. And we do have some guidelines for how the rest of this event will proceed. So I'll pass it on to Jeremy to give us some of that context.
Yeah, just really briefly, each panelist is going to have 7 to 8 minutes to speak. Then we should have plenty of time to talk amongst ourselves. It's meant to be a town hall, so participation encouraged, but keep yourself to 90 seconds. I'll emphasize that again when we get there. And we do have to be out by 8:45, just as a general time check for the workers here who have to go home. So with that, I will hand it to, we're just going alphabetical order. So Max Elbaum is on Zoom and he's going to start us off. Go ahead, Max.
Okay. The main dynamic shaping U.S. politics today is the drive of the MAGA bloc to impose.
Max, just give us 1 second. We're going to try to get you on the screen here. Just one moment.
Okay.
Please stand by.
Put a Jeremy on your screen so you can have your Jeremy while you listen to Jeremy at the people.
Max, go right ahead.
Thanks. The main dynamic shaping U.S. politics today is the drive of the MAGA bloc to impose authoritarian rule and a white Christian nationalist agenda in the country. We're living through the most intense and dangerous phase of the counterattack against the gains of the 1960s and the 1930s that started within hours of the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. It's driven by two of the most deeply rooted forces in U.S. society, a sector of the capitalist class centered in the fossil fuel industry, and the large layer of people of many classes who consider a society ordered by racial and gender hierarchies to be the only legitimate way to organize the United States. Trump's election in 2016 was the fruit of 50 plus years of both electoral and non-electoral organizing by those forces. It further whetted their appetite for power. An outpouring of resistance by the much larger but much more fragmented and less well-organized anti-MAGA majority prevented MAGA from achieving its goals via the 2018, 2020, and 2022 elections. This has produced a kind of stalemate between the MAGA and anti-MAGA blocs. The drama being played out today centers on whether MAGA will succeed in attaining full federal power in 2024 or soon after, and if they are beaten back, what will be the character of the anti-MAGA governing coalition? Broadly speaking, there's three contending political currents in this drama. MAGA, the centrist bloc anchored by the Biden wing of the Democratic Party, and a progressive bloc whose most prominent figures are Bernie Sanders and the Squad. Within the progressive current, there is a growing socialist trend. MAGA is the strongest of these three currents. It's captured the Republican Party and the Supreme Court. It holds trifectas in 22 states. It's lavishly financed, has an organized political base in the white evangelical churches. It has a powerful narrative that appeals to white grievance and provides a deep sense of meaning and empowerment to those who accept it. It has an unmatched propaganda and disinformation apparatus in Fox News and the rest of the right-wing media. Its loyalists are active within the armed bodies of the state at every level, and it has incorporated openly white supremacist and fascist militias into its coalition to serve as modern-day brown shirts. The MAGA bloc makes no secret of their agenda if they take full power: a national abortion ban and a national right-to-work law, austerity for the majority, more tax cuts for the rich, a blank check for the fossil fuel industry, an eliminationist program for transgender people, Jim Crow 2.0, and a combination of McCarthyism and the 1960s, 1970s COINTELPRO effort for the left. The centrist and progressive currents contend against one another for power, including in bitter battles in the Democratic primaries. But the bulk of both blocs have joined together in voting to defeat Republican candidates in the last three elections. The centrist bloc controls the executive branch, as the overwhelming majority of the Democratic delegations in the Senate and a slim majority in the Democratic House delegation. It's rooted in important sectors of capital, but retains a substantial social base, not only among well-off professionals, but among sections of the labor movement, the Black, Latino, and Asian American communities, and the mainstream women's and LGBTQ movements. It is more committed to US global hegemony than to the specific neoliberal model of capitalism, and with Bidenomics, it has junked many elements of neoliberalism for a program that has more mass appeal. There's not much enthusiasm for the centrist leadership in its social base, but the combination of deep fear of MAGA and lack of confidence that progressives in the left have either the capacity or the maturity to deliver on what sounds to many like abstract promises keeps that base more committed to the centrist leadership than most leftists like to think. The progressive current has grown by orders of magnitude since 2016, with the key dynamics being Bernie's two campaigns and the George Floyd uprising. There's a large-scale sympathy with many of the left's ideas, important fresh energy in the labor movement and other movements. If we compare the progressive current and its socialist component with where we were in 2015, we've come a long way, and everyone in DSA should take pride in that organization's contribution to this revitalization of the left. But if we look at the progressive strength compared to the other players in national politics, we remain well behind the curve. The progressive current doesn't have a unified, compelling narrative or the media apparatus necessary to get its ideas out in systematic form to tens of millions of people. Bernie's campaign showed this degree of sympathy for left ideas, but the infrastructure needed to turn sympathy into a consolidated political base lags way behind. The labor movement and the Black church are the two structure-based, as opposed to self-selection-based mass organizations that have been the traditional anchors of the US left. Because of that, the level of durable, institutionalized working class power correlates directly with the size, politics, and combativity of these organizations. We see stirrings of the potential for revitalization and growth today, but as things currently stand, both labor and the Black church are weaker than they have been in decades. The socialist movement has experienced tremendous growth, and the barometers of this growth are the number, among other things, of the number of socialist elected officials. But there are few campaigns, electoral or non-electoral, that can be won by socialists alone. The gains made have in almost all cases come from situations where socialists have been able to galvanize or participate in coalition with the wider ecosystem of progressive organizations. The potential to build on the gains that we've made since 2016 is substantial, but it will be realized only if we have the political space, the democratic space, and the time to do the kind of day-to-day organizing that's required to sink deep roots in a multiracial, gender-inclusive working class, which is why progressive leaders who have led key battles and acquired the most acute sense of the actual balance of forces in the country today, people like Bernie Sanders, Brandon Johnson, just elected mayor of Chicago, key figures in the state-based power-building groups, the unions, and the issue-based groups that gained strength and experience, especially in battleground states in 2020, advocate a strategy that's characterized by the phrase block and build. Participate in and work to expand and cohere the very broad anti-MAGA coalition that includes both centrists and progressives that is absolutely required to defeat MAGA candidates at every level and then protect the results. And at the same time, partly by being the most resolute fighters and the most far-seeing fighters against MAGA, grow our independent progressive power along the way. That can lead to coming out of 2024 with a strong enough progressive bloc to work both inside and outside of a new governing coalition to start a new progressive cycle in US politics. The goal of such a cycle, given the specific history of this country as a settler, colonial, and slaver state, and the bitter struggles it's taken to bring about the still incomplete development of multiracial democracy in this country, is a third reconstruction, which is the potential gateway to a socialist United States.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So when analyzing the conditions and prospects for the American left, I think it's really important that we start at the global level, so super macro. And around the world, workers have been experiencing stagnant or declining standards of living for decades now, since around the 1970s. And US hegemony is weakening. We have a new geopolitical order. You're seeing the looming threat of war with China in the wake of this intensifying capitalist competition between the ruling classes of these countries. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is in many ways a dress rehearsal, I think, for this potential war and this new shifting order. And of course, looming over all of this is the ecological crisis, the megastorms, the heat waves, the mass extinction. And I think these interlocking crises, the geopolitical level, the ecological level, the economic level, are being used by capitalists and the politicians tied to them to churn popular discontent in some really scary directions, nationalist, racist, reactionary directions. So alongside all of this, you're seeing the rise of a far right globally in response to the failures of the neoliberal center to really address these questions. And politics globally is being polarized between an extreme right and a weakening neoliberal center, with leftists, for the most part, very marginal and on the sidelines. Although I think there are some promising examples For example, I think PSOL in Brazil, which is joining Lula to fight the right and expand social democratic reforms, while also keeping some distance from him when he introduces austerity budgets, for example, or Petro in Colombia. I think that these are important examples that we really need to study. And moving closer to where we are today in the United States, you're seeing a lot of these global dynamics at play. You have an unfolding economic crisis, the banking busts in Silicon Valley, intensifying inflation, and the American class, working class, is the one suffering the most from this. We're facing skyrocketing rents, mortgages, and wages that just can't keep up with inflation. And the far right is making major gains amidst all of this, with these 6 Supreme Court fanatics who've intent on who have taken away abortion rights, affirmative action, student loan forgiveness. And Biden's response to this has been really weak. He promised that nothing would ever change, and nothing did. His government did increase subsidies to private companies to build infrastructure, but for the common person, nothing has changed, and things have actually gotten worse. He didn't expand access to healthcare. Unemployment benefits were cut from COVID relief policy. We're having to pay back our student debt now, and he's not standing up to the Supreme Court. So it's looking like we're going to face a presidential race between Biden and Trump, and it's likely going to be close, and there's no competition to Biden and the Democratic Party, even though he is very unpopular. But that said, it's not all bleak. I think that there's a lot of potential and possibilities, and I agree with Jeremy that this is, one of the most exciting times for the American left since the 60s or the 30s, arguably. I think events like the Dobbs decision are increasingly showing Americans the failure of the Democrats and our liberal institutions. Millions participated in the Black Lives Matter uprisings in 2020, and we have the largest socialist organization in the country in decades, with electeds all over the country at the local, state, and national level. And finally, I think the most exciting thing out of all of this is that despite declining unionization rates, you're seeing an uptick in labor activity in this country since the pandemic, with worker-led union efforts in places like Starbucks. You have reform movements in major unions like the UAW and the Teamsters, and socialists played a big role in making that happen by being on the shop floor and doing this themselves. So for the last part, I'll shift to my what is to be done part in light of these conditions. And following Michael Harrington, I'm going to focus on 3 things: labor, electoral, and internal organizational reform. So number 1, labor. The global crises that we face cannot be solved without worker power. Workers at the point of production in strategic industries like energy, like the building trades, logistics, education, and healthcare. These are the workers that have the leverage to play a fundamental role in leading the fight to address climate change, to address the far right, et cetera. But it's not going to happen on their own, and we'll need more socialists getting those jobs and getting directly involved with workers to build and cohere militant workplace action. And we need to create movements to take back existing unions and build new ones and connect them to these broader political fights beyond the shop floor. And to do that, we are going to have to confront union leadership today who still remain very wedded to a kind of business unionism and are committed to building to maintaining a subservient role to the Democratic Party and not fostering militancy, democracy, and the kind of class struggle unionism that we need to wage these fights. Number two, we need to continue to build our electoral project and address some of the challenges that have come from our success. While I give people like AOC a lot of credit, they have with time increasingly deferred to the Democratic Party hierarchy. Bernie himself has retreated, I think, a bit from his more independent stance that he took in 2016 and 2020. He endorsed Biden immediately when he, okay, I'll wrap up soon. So, and let me just move to our task. So I think our task electorally, I'll have to cut off from my third one, but I think our task electorally is to undertake class struggle elections of socialist cadre who have a history of movement organizing and strong links to working class organizations and understand and unequivocally support opposition to capitalist priorities. And I think while we should absolutely use those electoral positions to pass legislation, at least right now, our primary goal, given our size, should be to build up DSA, to build up working class organization and raise consciousness. So I'll stop there. Maybe I can cover some more in my final comment.
All right. Good evening. America, it's not a democracy. So coming through the left, I just want to talk a bit about this idea that we're not a democracy, the implications this has for the politics of the right and left, and some ways forward with some anecdotes and personal reflections thrown in the mix. I agree with Max. We want to achieve a third and hopefully final reconstruction. I want to talk a little bit about the legacies of the first and second and reactions to each. Just a bit about myself. I'm in DC 37. I'm a Parks and Department worker. And on the left, I kind of split my time between like a, underground anti-fascist street movement, chanting, blood and fire on the streets, and the more like institutional tenant organizing movement. I'm really worried right now that the distance between direct extra-parliamentary left and a more like institutional left is really far apart. I think we're going to fall into, on the institutional side, a kind of nonprofit municipalism, and on the extra-parliamentary side, a kind of localism. I think unity and resilience must be forged between these paths, and I think DSA is the body that can forge that unity. So the claim that America is not a democracy isn't new. It's central to the revolutionary abolitionist movement, which I want to push socialists to recognize as a core tradition. Though their bodies are moldering in the grave, their spirit marches on. They were disloyalists. They promoted mass militant disobedience, de-arrest, self-offense against slave catchers, etc. They ran candidates. They forged unity through practical, on-the-ground work and constant debate. They saw the whole system, North and South, as rotten to the core. Abolitionists throughout the Atlantic and Caribbean looked to Haiti, not America, as a model of liberation and self-determination. Toussaint Louverture's story was taught to kids during the first Reconstruction, and there was a memorial to John Brown in Port-au-Prince after his raid. When de Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America, abolitionists responded to the text called Tyranny in America. What was this tyranny? Beyond the white supremacist despotism, Jacksonian democracy involves periodic deputization, mobilization of mobs of armed white supremacist men to enforce the pro-slavery constitutional order, much as today. This basic model returned after Reconstruction as the white supremacist redeemers sought to entrench Jim Crow. We're familiar, I hope, with moments like the coup in Wilmington, but a key part of Jim Crow was a deep patchwork of laws that essentially remove local democracy from Black majority areas. After Wilmington in North Carolina, white counties had local elections, Black counties didn't. There was also retrenchment, a policy that essentially defunded local Black governments. No meaningful democracy or self-rule could be allowed. Something similar happened in the 1970s as Black power and working class rebellion grew. A paper called The Hollow Prize lays it out. Municipal governments rely on funds from the state and the federal government. The paper writes that it seems altogether probable that state legislators, mostly suburban rural whites representing other whites, could do any number of tactics to take power away from a Black government and face little consequence. They could swipe funding, place the police under state control, arbitrarily take away powers, etc. All of these things are currently being done across the US. All that leaves municipal governments to do is service the debt and build prisons. That's all they do. The market will be free, the debt will be serviced, and the people will be disciplined. That's our landscape. Property equals democracy. Suburbs have local control, zoning rights, etc. NYCHA residents, on their hand, no democracy really, and everyone in the city wants those buildings to crumble. On a personal note, when I was in the anti-fascist movement, all those fucking Proud Boys were shitheads from Long Island and Jersey, Daniel Pennies of the world. And, when we ran the biggest Nazi skinhead gang out of New York City, the Boot Boys, their pathetic leader, he just went to New Jersey and now they all drink out there. I remember this Washington Post article about de-radicalizing your kid. The author was from Montgomery County, Maryland, which had anti-school integration protests right around the time of the article. People wanted to blame YouTube algorithms or 4chan for the alt-right, sure. But we also have to look our deeply, deeply racist and segregated system in the eye. So we are in a democracy. We're faced against the power of the police, a gang. They protect property, they service the debt. Where does that lead us? We need to build an alternative culture of real power, real democracy, and working class protagonism. Like I said, I'm really, really worried that the left in New York City will put a lot of eggs in the basket of nonprofit municipalism, getting a progressive mayor into office. When I came to New York City, we had a progressive mayor. He couldn't do shit about the cops. He built more jails. On top of that, our city is dominated by fire and our budget depends on their profits. An article in the City recently read, quote, "The state and city are to fix their future budget problems without massive spending cuts. They will be increasingly reliant on the richest of the rich to continue making a profit." Capital still controls us. We do not control it. A new de Blasio won't change this basic situation. We all want to build the working class's ability to govern and recognition of that ability, but that goes hand in hand with educating and agitating against the order that says property equals democracy. So what do? I want to emphasize the responsibility socialists have to strengthen and build independent working class institutions that build a culture of working class self-movement, self-determination, self-governance, democratic institutions like DSA that put forward political demands that trouble the world, institutions that treat people like protagonists. Now, this may seem like I'm making an anti-electoralist argument, but I'm really not. I love our political demands, our big range of vision, the Medicare for All, the Green New Deals. We can't fall into localism, but these demands aren't worth much if they aren't tied together with building alternative democratic culture, building spaces to do politics in, building working class self-movement, working class governance. We want a working class that governs, therefore we need to include political demands that ensure their governance and win them over to the idea of being a governing class, but we also need spaces that let them govern. An example of this, Crown Heights Tenant Union. It grew leaders like Farah. It grew Mike Hollingsworth, right? It grew many, many worker tenant protagonists that fight their landlords day to day. It's not about how, it's about how, not what we do. We have a chance at facing the reactionary chuds head on with a mass national campaign to win the battle for democracy, a campaign of disloyalism against the cops, against the transphobes, against the Supreme Court. And it's so, so important that we, unlike DC, LA, and Chicago, we've held the line on voting no on budgets. That helps our organizing. But we have to message and own those no votes, own winning from opposition, like how we won BPRA while voting no on the budget. So it's not perfect right now, and CHTU and across the left, we have a huge issue with skill monopolization. It's one of our biggest internal threats. Organizations live and die based on the middle layer's ability to democratically govern. In independent working class organizing, we call this solidarity, not service. As we grasp around in the dark for tools, we need to think through the implicit assumptions within common nonprofit organizing projects. Decisions are made by experts, not by members, etc. Instead, we should use democracy and collectivity to gain meaning from experience. This is what the civil rights movement did. A quote from Aaron Pineda, say the Black freedom movement's mode of populist organizing is not well captured by the conventional model. A partisan leader mobilizing a constituency by claiming to speak for the people in direct and unmediated terms. The organizations of the civil rights movement operated largely independently from the centralized structures of party politics, where they looked creatively and strategically for ways to interface with and transform them. They're institution building. So around like a year ago, I wrote this piece, I was criticizing stuff, and people were like, well, what's your model? And, never the twain shall meet. I was, couldn't really figure it out at the time, but I think Cop City shows that this could work. The battle to stop Cop City, direct action and institution building can be together. They have incredible unity down there. At the end of the hearings, everyone should go and watch those hearings. People were saying Atlanta is not a democracy, a message that's being continued in the referendum campaign. So we can have national strategies. We can be the ones talking about freedom, about democracy. The right shouldn't own those words. We should talk about how the US doesn't have it and how we win it. So capital comes dripping with blood and dirt, which means we're standing in an open wound. We're in an open wound. We need to build the tools to get out. That means fighting for working class governance, democracy. This is a big part of that alternative culture, and getting our hands dirty in the everyday struggle, grounded in the abolitionist tradition here. That's how we are going to extract the necessary materials. So to conclude, I spent half of my time on the left doing direct anti-fascist action. I spent the other half helping build institutions. These two tendencies rarely meet, and the former really isn't in the room tonight. But if I could summarize the lessons I learned from both, it is that the good life comes from self-movement. Socialism isn't really about getting the goods. It's about the movement of working class to liberate humanity, and we can break their haughty power.
Next, we have Renee Parody on the back end, if we can highlight their video. Oh, beautiful. Great. Renee.
Hi, everyone. I may regret this at the end of my remarks, but I'd like to start by thanking NYC-DSA and Middle Hudson Valley DSA for inviting me here today. For our initial statements, we were given the prompt, what are the risks and opportunities for the US left? And being a lawyer and quite literal, I wrote up a section on opportunity and a section on risk. I think the opportunities for the left of the United States are significant right now. They're better than they've been in a long time. We have support for socialism among millennials and Zoomers, like I'm sure most people in the room, at or above support for capitalism. We have elected socialists at nearly all levels of government all over the US and a lot in New York. The labor movement, while still a shadow of its former self, is engaged in exciting new organizing with upticks in strikes and overall militancy and revival of stagnant unions through rank and file movements. In the wake of the 2008 depression, Americans have a rising awareness of economic inequality and the role of the ruling class in maintaining it. Social movements like Occupy, Black Lives Matter, and the climate movement have activated thousands more into left-wing political engagement. And finally, DSA itself. For the first time since the McCarthy era, we have a large, vibrant socialist organization that can actually intervene meaningfully in political struggles, whether that be in the electoral arena, in the labor movement, or in the streets. I belatedly realized when I was drafting that I had completely forgotten to mention the two Bernie Sanders campaigns. It's, of course, incredibly important in understanding why those of us in DSA find ourselves here in this large socialist organization. We need to really recognize the effect those campaigns had in turning people into socialists and turning socialists into organizers. I'm old enough that I went to a Ralph Nader campaign event back in 1999. I don't think his message that I heard then, that there was absolutely no difference between George Bush and Al Gore, resonates much after the war on terror and the invasion of Iraq. Bernie's insight was that you could get more people involved with a left-wing, explicitly socialist campaign inside the Democratic Party where you don't risk playing spoiler. It's a key part of his campaign successes and our own incredible growth. Then, as Max alluded to, beyond the explicitly socialist left or explicitly described, you have a number of sort of self-styled progressives inside the Democratic Party, even who aren't socialists, who are fighting for a more confrontational stance with the nationalist right. Just to take two examples, in both Minnesota and Michigan, state Democratic parties have taken control, have a trifecta for the first time in a while, with incredibly narrow majorities, which in the past would have militated in favor of not doing much. And instead, they've gone ham. Michigan, they've repealed right to work, they've expanded voting rights, they've passed historic levels of funding for the state's schools. In Minnesota, they're giving tax rebates to everyone who makes less than $75K a year. They've passed a law requiring all utilities in the state to provide 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040, and 12 weeks of paid time for every worker in the state if they have a serious medical condition themselves or need to care for a family member. In both states, they've passed abortion protections and free school meals for every K-12 public school student. Given these opportunities, I believe there's a real opportunity to coalesce a working class popular front to take power through the Democratic ballot Democratic Party ballot line for politics that confronts the growing power of right-wing Christian nationalists and the increasingly brazen right-wing governing class that is happy to let these so-called MAGA Republicans do their dirty work. I also believe it's imperative we coalesce that kind of popular front to meet, I believe it's imperative that we coalesce such a popular front to meet two threats that I believe just simply can't wait for us to coalesce a purely socialist front, the climate crisis and the growing and increasingly violent nationalist right. So that's the opportunity: build a popular front, save the nation and the world from the worst excesses of capitalism, then leverage our participation in that front into greater socialist power and ultimately the transformation into socialism at a moment of crisis or opportunity. What are the risks we face? People have expressed the sentiment I'm about to in many different ways, but my favorite formulation is one from Jonah Furman, labor maven and former NYC-DSA member. The primary threat to the left remains not co-option, but irrelevance. The socialist left remains a tiny force in the US. We punch above our weight in elections, and the press loves to write about us because socialism is still something of an oddity for Americans. But we are tiny. Anything we have done or won, we have done in coalition with other people. How to build and maintain those coalitions has to be a part of DSA's calculation, or we will lose what relevance we have won through hard work over the past 6 years. DSA ballooned in membership after 2016, while other socialist groups have faltered or not seen the same expansion. This is not despite our willingness to work with those who aren't yet socialists or don't yet have perfect positions on every item in our voluminous platform, but because of it. It's worth noting that both Socialist Alternative and DSA endorsed Bernie in 2016, while DSA chapters used their influx of new members to, among many other projects, work to elect Sanders supporters in the Democratic Party ballot line. SALT argued that the failure of the Sanders campaign meant that Bernie should launch a third party. I'm not saying this is the only reason DSA grew exponentially, while SALT's membership numbers remained in the low 4 digits. Although to my knowledge, the 24 hours after AOC won her primary is still our biggest single day of membership growth. But I would encourage delegates to DSA's National Convention to keep that contrast in mind when considering the raft of convention proposals put forward by former Socialist Alternative members trying to force a change to DSA's electoral strategy. Shameless plug for Sam Lewis's recent article in Socialist Forum this week, which I think is great and goes into depth about these and other proposals that would derail our electoral project. We face the same immense challenges the left has faced since the advent of something we could meaningfully call the left. Our opponents have infinitely more resources and significantly more power, while we depend on the willingness of working class people to use their meager free time and sparse discretionary income to do the hard work of organizing for a better world. But right now, at this moment, we have an opportunity to continue to build power and organize for real change. We should not let it slip away by choosing to make ourselves irrelevant.
Hana, please, when you're ready.
Hey everyone, this is Hana Shrestha. I am joining this event from Mid-Hudson Valley, where I just won an election to be in the New York State Assembly. And I wanted to speak a little bit from the perspective of really zooming in to this district, because this is not a district with a major city. It's a huge geographical spread with independent leaning constituents. And it is also skews older. So we had a sort of an experiment when we ran a socialist campaign here in how to build support for a socialist candidate in a district that usually does not meet the DSA profile. And also, I want to preface my opinion on the state of the American left by saying that I moved to the United States 2 weeks before 9/11. And after 9/11, I discovered that there was still an active American left, which I was not even aware as somebody coming from the global South. So I was an organizer with Mid-Hudson Valley DSA and the Public Power Coalition, which is very much DSA led with some other organizations. And I went from being an organizer to an elected, which is not a trajectory that I had ever envisioned in my life. So for me, I'm really interested in what to do with socialist power when you have some, even when it's very little. So, you know, a New York State Assembly member does not have a ton of power, but it is a position of power and what you do with it if you're trying to build a socialist project. So I think that as a DSA elected, what I've learned in my 6 months so far is that you really have to be intentional about how you're going to use this office to further the organization itself outside of, you know, just legislative wins and legislative changes, and how much you have to invest in sort of like continual leadership, especially in my very small chapter in the Mid-Hudson Valley, which is just around 300 chapter members right now. How you sustain on what you have won so far, because I think that generally speaking, I feel like this is a challenge for left, is where to go next, you know, especially if you've arrived somewhere that you haven't arrived before. And I find that in my first 6 months that the challenge of being a socialist with very clear ideology in a very dysfunctional system that you have to work in because you don't have any other choices. Like on a very personal level, the main challenge is how to continually stay moralized, because everywhere, you know, from all directions, you're being hit with things that are absolutely demoralizing, absolutely paralyzing. But at the same time, you have to stay focused on what you're trying to win, things that are within your control and things that will help the movement. But it is very difficult on a day-to-day basis when you're on the inside. It is really a mind game. It's a roller coaster. And I think in New York, we are really blessed that we have a socialist in office committee that brings the org together with the elected, so that this is not strictly a project that is just about the legislators. It is very much a two-way working relationship with the organization. So now we have two chapters, New York City DSA and Mid-Hudson Valley DSA in this committee, and how to sort of chart the legislative path together and how to continually carve pathways to victories that we can build on. So the you know, DSA driven legislation that got me to run for office is Bill Public Renewables Act, which has been referenced before as BPRA. And when we first started working on this bill, the main reason people really didn't get it outside of our coalition and outside of, you know, eco-socialists, is because it is not a climate solution that is going through the private market. And that really threw people off. Like this idea that something should be in the public domain, as old as it is, still needed a revival, still needed a consensus building, and still needed all of the various pieces to click at the right time for us to be able to pass this legislation. And now we've passed it, which is for publicly owned renewable energy to be built in New York through the New York Power Authority, and to have the strongest labor provisions in the country for the renewable sector, and to make sure that environmental justice communities will be the beneficiaries of this energy build out. So, you know, I think that it's not an extremely radical bill in the sense that we are still working with the limits that are, you know, that we haven't overcome yet, but it really opened up pathways to organizing people around the idea of public goods and against privatization. So in my district, we have older folks, where we have independent-minded folks who don't really have necessarily a strong allegiance to the Democratic Party. And it was very illuminating to talk to this group of people about publicly owned energy, especially publicly, you know, especially the distribution utility and so on, and to see excitement and energy behind this sort of framework. And I think that we really have to be disciplined about being focused, because I think every crisis is an opportunity for organizing, obviously. And I think the right is just very good at it because they don't care about consequences or anything. They really seize on every crisis. And so for us on the left, I feel like every avenue is an opportunity and we must use it as an opportunity. And that's how I see the electoral project, you know, because we have to sort of build our the pathways to our victories in every avenue that is available to us, because we don't have the option to just wait for the perfect way to do it, as long as we know two things, which is that eventually we have to remember who our real opponents are, because, you know, in the left, we sometimes really get carried away with sort of internal debate. But at the same time, I think the internal debates are necessary because we also cannot lose sight of the long-term goal as we are sort of, you know, celebrating short-term wins and short-term sort of goals that we have set. So I think that, yeah, so I think that, you know, using the electoral office to represent not just the constituents, but also the organization and its goals is what I have taken away as an effective way to use my position.
Okay, so we're going to open it up for some general discussion, a lot of amazing remarks, and a lot on the table here about assessing the current situation and where we're headed. We ask that everyone keep your thoughts, comments, questions to 90 seconds. We'll cut you off just so we get as many people as possible, as well as Zoom participants to be able to speak. Feel free to ask direct questions of anyone who's spoken, or just to participate in the discussion. We have about half an hour for that. Okay, and we are going to have a mic runner, so feel free to raise your hand.
And we will alternate between Zoom and in-person stack. So those of you who are joining us virtually, please also either use the raise hand feature on Zoom or please type stack into the chat.
And just at the end, the panelists will get a chance to just kind of synthesize a little bit and share some of their thoughts from the whole event. So just look forward to that too. Great. Jack, do you want to, I see Jorge over there. Start us off.
Hello, everyone can hear me. Okay. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for their wonderful comments and just great analysis, a lot for me to think about. I just think one of the questions I have for everybody insofar as thinking about the current state of the American left, I know something that's come up a lot on both national debates and both local debates is this idea of criticism and debate within the left, right? I think the way I would characterize it is by two different extremes, right? One of them is that if we have, when it comes to sort of controversial decisions amongst the squad members or even our local SIO, when it comes to how do we bring up certain concerns or criticisms, when in fact, one element of it being able to open up this discussion to make as many people involved and learn about sort of what are the tensions, what are the kind of questions about what kind of political project we're trying to build, but, possibly put us at risk of airing our dirty laundry out there, right? Making us weak, making us vulnerable to attacks from the right in many ways that they have loved to sort of do. And on the opposite end of that is thinking about when we have these sorts of questions of deliberation around whether one elected was making a correct decision or not, whether certain things have consequences, keeping it within the family, right? Narrowing it to smaller groups of circle to address these concerns as they come up, right? Have one-on-one conversations, have sort of organizing conversations when we have that, but possibly leave out the sort of political development and education that is necessary to make us a mature and developed movement. Those are what I would characterize as two different extremes. I'm just curious, insofar as this being a big topic of discussion, how much do we publicly debate this? What folks think about how to address these issues about criticisms and internal debates about what our electeds and representatives do.
And just to the panelists, we'll come back to you all maybe every 2 or 3 comments, just to give more people a chance to talk. So, but if you have thoughts, please store them up. I saw over there a hand.
Hello. Try to stop me at 90 seconds. I dare you. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, so there's some talk about a popular front. There's talk about crisis. There's talk about the necessity of, our electoral project, which I totally agree with. But I think in my personal experience as an organizer for almost a decade, my reading of history, oftentimes crisis moments, big political pushes to resolve either impending antagonism or a very present contradiction, like the civil rights movement, like voting rights access, stuff like that. It's oftentimes hard to create political subjects, create people who want to do politics or understand how to do politics in their everyday life, and not just see themselves as, kind of a constituent being mobilized in this broad project to resolve this contradiction, which is my main disagreement with the Popular Front, and especially what Jeremy was saying about kind of our base being these downwardly mobile, college-educated people who are already kind of familiar because of privilege and access and proximity to a socialist identity. But these other people, kind of this broad mass, is not given that opportunity to grow a socialist identity, who's not given an opportunity to become an organizer and activist. And so this Popular Front kind of just creates, a mass to be mobilized. So a question to the panelists is like, do you think that's important? How do we do that in our electoral project and in crisis moments?
No one's on Stack on Zoom yet, so we will. Zoom people, get on Stack.
Hey, my name is Neil from the Central Brooklyn branch of DSA. I just wanted to thank Max. I mean, all the panelists were great. Max's comments gave me a lot to think about. I thought his analysis was really interesting about the different kind of social forces, political forces out there. And I agree with his goal. A third reconstruction of the U.S., I think, is the goal, a transformation of U.S. society. But I didn't really understand the strategy he was advocating, to be honest. I mean, if I understand correctly, it was something about like, we need a popular front with the Democrats. We need a block with the Democrats. We need to fight MAGA Republicans. And I just think we should acknowledge like a block between the left and the center is a really, really difficult and probably not strategically viable thing to pull off. In my opinion, yeah, we want Biden to win in 2024, whoever's going to beat Trump. I don't want Trump to be president again. And yeah, we need space and time to build a left alternative to the far right. Totally agree with that. But I don't think we should pretend that we're in any sort of coalition with Joe Biden or some sort of popular front with the Democratic Party that they don't want. And I don't think does us any favors or doesn't actually help us advance the project of defeating the far right. Pretending we're in some kind of popular front or coalition with Joe Biden, in my opinion, does 3 things and 3 really bad things. It disorients our own activists. Our own activists don't know what we're doing. It repels a huge part of the population who are disengaged from politics, who aren't interested in the Democratic Party at all. And to be honest, it scares the suburban middle class who the Democratic Party has decided to make their main focus for building a majority to beat Trump. So if we care about fighting the right, yes, we do need to get smart and get strategic, but no, I don't think we need a popular front. We shouldn't be blocking with Joe Biden.
Time. Okay, we're gonna give, I think, panelists a chance to do a little responding, and then we have some more stacks. Also, panelists, keep yourselves to 90 seconds, please. So Sophia, you want to go? And if online panelists, you can, DM me or just put yourselves, like, raise your hand. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so to start with Jorge's question, it's a tricky one that I wrestle with a lot. I agree not everything can be public. We have to elect leader. When we elect leaders, we do trust them to undertake some responsibilities, some risks that can't necessarily be opened up. But I think I ultimately lean more in the other direction. And I think that withholding critiques and information also withholds the opportunity for our members to grapple with these questions that leaders are grappling with and to grow and advance our organization. Most recently, that played out with DSA's declining membership numbers, there was a lot of pushback. Why are you talking about this publicly? You know, the right, corporate Democrats are going to use this, but I think it's really important that our members think about that. On the question of the Popular Front, as I understood Max and Renee's argument, it was that the left needs to be leading the fight against the right. That I agree with, but I'm not sure I disagree with the idea that we form this coalition and leverage our participation in that front into this greater power. I don't really think that's feasible. And I think we have to be careful because working class people, the way they understand politics is voting. It's a lot of petty infighting. And if we don't sharpen our fight against the capitalist class first and foremost, the right as well, we risk just coming across as like super liberals, you know, rather than independent leftists. So.
Renee, go ahead.
Thanks everyone for your questions. I'll pick up Neil's, and I'm sorry, I missed the middle questioner's name. And I'll note Neil only talked about Max's Popular Front, and Sophia put us together. I want to be, I'm not sure if Neil was making a distinction between what I was saying, which is that our Popular Front should be with the left wing of the Democratic Party in particular, because I do think there's sort of a fight going on within the party. And so it's less about us popular fronting with the Dems qua the Dems, but about the left wing of the Democratic Party. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to make people into political subjects, particularly the kinds of folks that we mean when we say working class, right? Like people who don't have, who aren't graduates, who are proletarianized by the economy, gig workers, all the folks who are at the absolute bottom. And part of the reason it's hard to make them into political subjects is they don't have time, they don't have education, and they're disenfranchised, right? Like, why don't Americans vote is the Piven book from the 70s and articulates this broad swath of people who don't vote, and they don't vote because they're not engaged by the system. And I think it is a real danger that our saying you should go vote for Joe Biden because it's better than Trump winning does vitiate some of our message around the critique of Joe Biden. But I think people are smart enough to understand the difference between defensive voting and saying the sky's good. And I think that the only way that we're going to get to a world in which people have enough yeah, I mean, to be clear to the person commenting in the chat while I'm speaking, you know, I'm not saying that these are generally true. I'm referring to the folks who were sort of postulated in the question. But I think that even people who don't, you know, graduate are capable of understanding these things and getting engaged in this way. I think the reason they don't is because partially they don't have time, they don't have the space to do it, and I don't think we have the time to make the change that's necessary to get there without working with other people, as much as that does risk things, does risk those dangers that Neil and Sophia.
Yeah, Renee, you're at time. We're gonna give Max a chance to respond, then I'm gonna keep us moving if that's okay. Max, go ahead. I'm just looking at so you haven't spoken to that yet, but we will come back, and I will encourage our speakers who haven't spoken yet to speak first next time. Max, go ahead.
Well, we may not like it, but objectively, there is a block going on between leading figures in the progressive movement and the Biden administration. Bernie Sanders is the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. Ron Klain, who was chief of staff of Biden, talked every week with the Sanders people. There's agreements between the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Biden administration. There's a unity and struggle relationship that exists. DSA can figure out how we want to position ourselves in relationship to that. Obviously, that's controversial within DSA, but that block exists. And the amount of leverage that we in the left have in that block is dependent on how much power we have. And the sad fact of the matter is we have a lot less power than we would like to have. The politics that have moved history in the United States have combined these factors. Masses of people making trouble from below utilization of every battlefront, including electoral politics, all the way up through direct action and even in the Civil War armed struggle, and a broad cross-class front, and taking advantage of divisions within the enemy class. That's the only recipe that has worked in US politics to get us as far as we have. Won the battles for first Reconstruction, second Reconstruction, and the dynamic in the 1930s. The challenge before us today is to duplicate that and get ourselves in enough of a position in that kind of alignment that instead of being pushed out after we defeat MAGA, that we increase our power and move to a more advanced stage. I don't think that dynamic can be skipped and worked around. We make our own history, but under structures and the balance of forces that we inherit.
That's time.
and
That's time.
That's it. Thanks.
Ruthless out here. We've got two more Zooms, two more stacks on the Zoom. I'm sorry. Daniel S.
Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Hope you do. My name is Daniel. I'm a member of the Hunter College YDSA, member of New York City DSA. Very weird seeing myself on like split screen, but the question that I wanted to pose, I think, is regards to recent, I guess, discourse around like membership, a sort of like organizational versus political question of declining in general, like DSA membership and New York City DSA membership. And I think it's also relevant kind of heading into national convention. And I kind of wanted to ask maybe panelists for some opinion on that, but with sort of a little bit of context around juxtaposition to YDSA, the youth wing that have constantly kind of embarked on political questions of, endorsing the strategy of building towards an independent workers' party, embracing rank and file strategy, and many, many other things organizationally and politically, constantly see a continuous growth that allow us to build so many, many cool projects nationwide, from organizing here in New York City, RA unions, independent unions, wielding worker struggle on campus and at work, and while continuing building our youth wing. So I guess my question is, what do you think the role of YDSA is, if it's worth kind of investing it as an institutional project? What's its role in the future of a socialist movement? And also, how do you compare that to kind of, I guess, difference in the membership graphs? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm sorry you couldn't be here in person to hear the quack timer. Jesus. Thanks so much. And next on stack over Zoom is Miriam.
I'm actually gonna give it up. So
Understood.
uncharacteristically.
Thanks so much, Miriam. We have some in-person stacks. Do we have mics? Mics, where's Jack? That's hilarious. All right, we're gonna go rogue here. Elka.
Hi, my name is Robert. I'm very bad at speaking to microphones, so I apologize in advance. Doing well? Okay. So this is my first time ever in a level of political organization like this. I've grew up in DC, always been very politically active in many different forms. But the one thing that I'm noticing in my time here is, so first of all, like, I've been a welder, metal fabricator for 10 years here in New York City. I have been true fucking labor, and I've worked in 1%er homes. But I've worked with a lot of coworkers that really do feel extremely disenfranchised, and for rightly so. And one of the things that I do empathize with a lot of my friends and coworkers in a lot of ways is there is no consistent message from these political groups to reach out to them to give them a tools for a better life. And I've heard a lot of conversations that, I mean, I feel like this is actually the paradox of Marxism, of where Marxism is so intelligent, so brilliant, but it is really hard to convey the complexities of it to the common working person in a lot of ways, but it can be. And it is very easy to actually break it down and deliver those message. And sometimes I feel like the left believes too much in the ivory tower that of we want to be a better good, but it takes a lot of work and it does take coalitions. I'm sorry, I don't want
Biden to just have a magical pin and force through Medicare for all and other things. We have to build coalitions. We do have to force the DNC to become more left. It's one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders was the greatest political campaign, I think, in recent times, is because without winning, he still changed the political narrative throughout this country. And we have to get better. The left, as across the board, needs to get a little bit better with messaging. And I think one thing that would be good for some of these meetings is figure out what are the 3 main points that we can, sorry.
Can you hold my beer? All right. Hi, thanks everyone. My name's Peter. So marginalization is a bigger threat than co-optation sounds nice, and I agree, it probably is true. But phrases like this flatten nuance and I think are said in service of ideology. Obviously, no one wants to be marginal. The idea is that you say that phrase to justify whatever political calculation you've made, and maybe that's one that someone risk as risking co-optation. The implication here is big automatically equals good. The socialist left should be big, but the Republican Party is big. The Republican Party is not good. We can't return to the margins, but we can't return to acquiescence to the Democratic Party either. Which brings me to coalition work. The issue is not coalition with non-socialists or waiting for a perfect socialist bloc, like Renee said. The issue is deferring to a political bloc that wants to see us marginalized. Decisions that we make as far as coalitions go are not just ones that affect us in the short term. So some sacrifices that we might make in name of quote unquote coalition building might affect us and put us on weaker footing for the long term when we're trying to win more ambitious reforms. I think that's something we really need to consider right now.
Yeah, I really like the comment by Thomas, the welder. Yeah, Rob. Okay, whatever. Well, when I was right after college, I read Revolution in the Air. Love that book. And I was also reading. I was working on a trail crew in the White Mountains, and I was reading like value form theory. And then like one of my crew members was like, what are you reading? And I just like could not answer because I don't know, that stuff was way too complex. I didn't really know what I was reading, and I was just pretending because college makes you really good at like, not doing the reading and then sitting at a table, be like, well, here's what I think, right? And a lot of people in socialism are also pretty good about that. Dare I say. But like you say, what's a better life? The good life, I think C.L.R. James said it really well. The good life is about self-movement. It's about being in an organization where you feel like you're a protagonist. You don't feel like you're a victim. You feel like you're a protagonist. Sarah Hana says it well. Like, I mean, everyday life, it's not just, in all everyday life, it's just being ground down and down. You feel like shit, you're worthless, etc. Right? It's really like that feeling of like I'm moving is so important. Quickly on coalitions, let's just talk about how it plays out in real time. Like, okay, so in 2019, I remember big rent law stuff. We were standing in the staircase, in our like color-coded shirts, all the different tenant groups, and we're just there. We didn't really talk to each other. The people at the front, they gave the speeches and they were all mingling down at the base of the staircase, but we were just standing and not talking to each other. I just like disagree with what Renee said of like, we don't have time unless we're like, I think it was just framed along the terms of like, representatives from each group talk with each other. And I think we should really be talking about like, how does everyone talk with each other? And if I'm in that staircase again, I'm going to talk to everyone else there who aren't wearing the same color t-shirts than I am, right? So I think it's T.S. Eliot who said, the great tragedy of life, you have the experience, but not the meaning. We need to find that meaning, and to do that, we need time, and we need time to discuss, which means people stepping back, right, from leadership and giving other people a chance to discuss and listen. We're too overworked.
Word or quack. Thanks, Isaac. Sarah Hana on Zoom.
I think, just again, coming from the experience of a small chapter, it is like the we're too overworked thing is really so real. And just in our case, understanding that everybody who is doing a lot is doing at, at a volunteer capacity and really taking on something that needs an understanding of just unfathomable exhaustion, which our campaign was in our case. And not, I think, I find that, when new people join our chapter, one of the things that is not very apparent is the reason that things are appear to be so messy and so sort of, I don't know the word, but, it's not like you can go to a chapter and be like, let me talk to the manager. And it's very difficult for people to understand that when you are joining a chapter and you're saying you should do this, you should do that. It's like, yeah, you should do it. You've joined the chapter and now you're DSA. And everybody is struggling with having a job to sustain themselves and doing this passion project that takes a lot out of you. And, in our case, actually, I think a lot of the members who are able to do things in the chapter is because they have the option of living with their parents, which is, again, like a real obstacle in terms of scaling up for a chapter. And so for the first time, I think our chapter has grown enough to really hit a pain point where we are continually running out of capacity to train new people and to mentor new people. And that is where we are right now. So I think for us, it's really important to also have an internal campaign, basically, to have a continuity in strategy, in leadership, and to make people understand that they have entered an organizing space that is very democratic, and is, in our case, very proactive, because really we don't have a manager, we don't have a boss, and sometimes that's very difficult to understand.
Thank you, Sarah Hana. I'll pass it to Renee on Zoom, and then we have about 10 more minutes left for discussion, and we'll open it up to the rest of the folks in the room. Renee.
Just to pick up on two things first, Robert, before you got cut off, it seemed like you were saying 3 main points. I don't know if this was meant to be about 3 main points, sort of summarizing historical materialism, or instead 3 main points around what we as democratic socialists are going to do for folks. But I really think we should get better about developing programs when we're working in a state or a locality. In California DSA, we're trying to get together an assembly slate to run, and we're right now in the process of putting together a program. And the idea is it'd be sort of, fewer than half a dozen things. These are the things that our folks are going to do, and use it to sort of, one, put forward non-reformist reforms that would have sort of material benefits to the working class, and draw a contrast between ourselves and other Democrats who won't. And I think it's a really something we need to get better about. I was part of the DSA national platform. That thing is bloated and long and really comprehensive, but pretty scattered. And I think whatever we can do to come up with more directed, short, like, this is what we will do for you that the other guys won't, and we'll do it for you because we're serving the working class, and we're of the working class, and we're socialists, I think is a really important thing we need to get better about in all of our chapters. And then picking up on what Peter said, yes, like, it's absolutely a good line that I'm using. It's an 8-minute presentation on what I think the biggest issues are that we're facing. I would say that most of these questions of what we should do about any individual thing are gonna be just that. They're gonna be individuated. They're gonna be choices that we can only make sort of in the moment, and can't put together prefigured litmus tests that are going to lock us in. And I'm at time. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Okay, stack is open again. I will also say to all the panelists, there was a request in Zoom if people would be willing to share their written remarks in some written form. So just throwing that out there, we can talk about that after. Okay, I see over there, Jack, do you want to? Blue shirt.
Good evening. My question is, and I think it might hit some of the questions about coalition. How do we face the problem that a lot of disenfranchised or marginalized demographics look to their liberation in neoliberalism? In my capacity as a Black man, I'm very aware of many people who think to solve the problems of the marginalization of Black community is acquire property. that the major issue around not having generational wealth is the most important thing. And similar veins happened very much around 2020 when I had the hardest time persuading a lot of Black people to vote for Bernie Sanders. And their natural response was, he thinks of everything through class and not enough about race. And I would caution that everyone working for Black liberation is not necessarily our natural allies. I'm aware of tendencies of what could arguably call Black fascism. I'm aware of tendencies that are very much more willing to listen to a Democratic Party offering neoliberal answers. And if you really want a multiracial working class or proletariat to work for its liberation, that needs to very seriously be looked at.
I mean, I saw in the black shirt back there, black and yellow.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to briefly respond to you right here who was talking about your coworkers not feeling empowered, and I thought, oh gee, I've got a card that I want to give you. This is the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee card. If your coworkers are not in unions, call EWOC. It will help them form a union. If they are in a union and it is not representing them and empowering them, we can get them in touch with a training for building a rank and file caucus. There's been a lot of discussion about electoral politics here and how people do and don't feel power. How workers have power, how working people have power is because they are the source of profit, and they understand that, and we are seeing that happen in strikes, ongoing organizing, ongoing all across the US in a giant wave over the past couple of years. There's not been much discussion of that here tonight, but I want to emphasize that there is something else going on where people have power and they are learning to use it, and they are learning to be organizers. They are learning to be strike captains. All these people, do they or do they not have power? Can someone without a college education feel they can be a strike captain? They can be out there. I have seen them kicking butt on the line. Okay, they can learn what it is. All right, sorry, I'm done.
And we have Miriam on Zoom.
Hi, I wanted to go back to this question about working with the people we don't really like and how much time we have. And I want to say that I share with many people here the frustration and rage with many elements of the Democratic Party. I loathe the Queen's machine. And I also was livid when Mayor Brown in Buffalo ran as a independent with backing of Republicans to get reelected after he lost the Democratic primary. So it's really, really hard to work with people like that. And there are many things that President Biden's doing that I really hate, like sending goddamn cluster bombs. But I have to say, the emergency is real. And the voting rights are being rolled back dramatically. Abortion rights are being rolled back. And if I have to work with people I don't like to save abortion rights, to save trans rights, to save voting rights, I am going to do that because, especially with the case of voting rights, we will be out, we won't be able to do it at a certain point. You've lost your power. So that's all.
Miriam, you're at time. Thank you. We're going to take a couple more remarks because panelists will have a chance then to give closings. I see Shuvu over here.
All right, how's it going, everyone? So I just had a comment, just a few points. So I think one thing that I heard was about we have to align with the Democratic Party in a popular front because the Republicans are more likely to delete us as socialists. And I think I just want to disagree with that too, because the Democratic Party is also the party that the CIA is more aligned with. So if it really comes to a matter of murking socialists, the Democratic Party leadership will do it too. I wanted to talk about kind of like the value of presidential elections as a way to raise mass consciousness and to build organizers. I think that Bernie's like 2016 run really helped create the DSA. And then AOC's victory also gave, a large boost to the DSA and created like a new wave of organizers. But then that doesn't necessarily mean that working within the Democratic Party is the only way to gain that national platform to build like a new level of organizers. I think someone brought up the Green Party run of Ralph Nader. And I think the interesting historical fact about that run is they say he played a spoiler role, but that campaign also organized like thousands of organizers across the country in support of his campaign. And the Greens had a choice, a subjective choice, to either reconstitute themselves as a mass membership party or to, break up into a federation. They chose the latter. But I think that right now in the presidential elections, we have Cornel West running also, and this is a DSA member, and he's running apparently in a united front fashion. So just as a last point to all panelists, like what should DSA's relationship to this run be? How can we actually use this run to build a mass level of
Okay, you're at time,
organizers
Shuvu.
to fight against fascism? We need organizers
Shuvu, we
to fight
do.
against fascism.
Okay, agreed. I think that's actually an agreement of everyone here, that the entire panel, it's been a big emphasis. I saw Ryan here, and sorry, that's going to have to be our last comment.
We do progressive stack, Jeremy. I think we haven't had a.
Oh, sure. Go ahead from the back. If you can both keep it really fast, then maybe we can do both.
All right. This might sound dumb, and I'm not as familiar with the DSA as I think a lot of the people speaking, but I hear this a lot. I work in leftist news, so I hear a lot of the debate, and I think, why is it so much like this conflict between whether or not we involve in electoral stuff when it's very clear that electoral, energy has to be spent like to, as everyone's saying, beat MAGA and their associates. But why isn't it more like this sort of like energizing push to additionally organize a popular front, which clearly by the membership here isn't, so much of a thing. And I think, so getting in touch with people in their neighborhoods where they're at is really important, as everyone probably agrees with. And I think that actually that media is an important way to think about the way we relate to people, and media is being controlled more and more and more and more by corporate power, whether it's left or Democrats or Republicans. And so just, and even things like Jacobin, we need more than that because they really only speak to a certain class. So it's important to meet people where they're at.
And Ryan, briefly.
Thank you very much.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, indeed. So yeah, I know a fair amount about the labor movement and the rank and file strategy, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about something that I don't know very much about, but everyone here is really smart and I want to hear what they have to say about it. Here's what you all think about industrial policy as a way of like making this relationship with people we don't like. Like, I think it's kind of a straw man for us to say, like, we're talking about endorsing Biden or something like that, right? We're talking about how do we work with the progressive movement within the Democratic Party to like get out of the climate crisis and impending fascism, and is industrial policy and pushing for things like Build Back Better something that we can do? Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to hand it to our panelists who have a lot on their plate, and also just a few minutes to offer closing remarks. Again, we're going to ask each of our panelists to keep it to 1.5 minutes, but feel free to respond to anything specific or also to just say something general. And maybe let's just do like reverse alphabetical order. So maybe let's start with Sarah Hana.
Yeah, honestly, I think that there is just way too much unwarranted fascination and obsession with the presidential race. As somebody who's now, in the state government, I think that people have to be organized at a more local level. And for me, the state is a good level to organize folks. The state is a worthy level of electoral organizing because you can move people not necessarily on policy, but on frameworks of thinking, and move people to understand socialism, to identify the problems or the sources of reasons why everybody feels like the system is not working for them. Because, you know, in the United States, I think everybody feels like the system is not working for them, but they think that is just because of a few individuals or a few things, and not because of capitalism, basically. So we have this immense opportunity to organize, but I simply do not think it's really going to happen via who we're going to endorse for a presidential primary. I think it has to happen at a more local level. The other, I'm also like really fried, but the other thing I wanted to, to say was, yes, so, you know, the American working class feels forever, identifies as a certain segment of, you know, has a class identity, but is also in conflict with property ownership, which is a much more present and much more a stronger identity. And that's what we are dealing with in terms of the organizing that we're doing right now. And I think that's where we can be very useful as the left.
Thanks, Sarah. Hana. Renee, go ahead.
Just to pick up the second to last comment, I think the reason that a lot of us are focused on these questions around electoral work is because that is basically the focus of a lot of the convention discourse and a lot of the discourse in DSA generally. There are lots of folks who do labor work and housing organizing, base building work. None of the people in my political faction have brought forward any kind of resolutions or proposals that would stop that work from happening or change its fundamental nature. But there are a lot of people who are bringing resolutions and amendments to change the fundamental nature of DSA's electoral project. So that's, I think, why it's such a focus of discussion. As to whether or not we should abandon our successful strategy and instead return to what the Green Party was doing, when I was a kid, I had terrible cavities, and my dentist did not believe me that the amount of Novocaine he was giving me was insufficient. And so I would end up in tears, and he'd be mad at me, and it'd be hours long and all this. One day I come in, he goes, let's try nitrous. We tried nitrous. It was beautiful. I was relaxed, no tears, perfect. The time after that, I come in, he goes, oh, well, you did so well with the nitrous last time. Why don't we try it without? And I was absolutely gobsmacked. And that's how I feel about folks who want to return to the Green Party theory of politics. Like, it didn't work. It made everyone in America mad at them for spoiling the 2000 election. And why would we go do that when we're successfully building power the way we are now?
Thanks, Renee. Isaac.
So on the question of meeting annoying people, if you do tenant organizing, you meet some of the most annoying people you'll find, because there are people who day and night do everything they can to just piss the shit out of their landlords. They complain about everything, and it's great. So I love working with annoying people, and people I find annoying. It's my life. Okay, so another thing you do in tenant organizing, you deal with this capitalist homeowner ideology, this idea of like kind of generational wealth. You can't build a successful tenant union if you don't confront this, and you don't have like a real base and like working class tenants of color. It's like, you just are not a tenant union if you don't have that, and if you don't deal with it. So we need to really be thinking about how we're putting ourselves in situations that are actually like, putting our ear to the ground. And we're not just saying, hey, sign my shit, join my shit. We got to ask on like what's going on every day. That's really important. And like, I think like, if factions don't want to, put out questions on like how we should do tenant organizing work, I think it's a sign that they haven't put enough like deep thought into it. We should be thinking about it. We should be challenging it. And I think you have put thought onto it, but we should be more open about having these open debates and questioning. I welcome those criticisms, questions.
Thanks, Isaac. Sophia.
Okay, this might be scattered. I don't have some big closing remark. But just answer some of the questions. To Ryan's question on on industrial policy. I think it definitely marks a shift away from traditional neoliberalism and provides some new opportunities for labor leverage in construction and manufacturing. But I think the big question going forward is who controls it. And as long as workers do not have an independent voice influencing the outcome, I think we should be skeptical. Another comrade brought up the question of media strategy, and I think that's really important. And I'm at the end of my NPC term, and I've been thinking, what could I have done differently? And I really think I would have focused so much more on comms. It's so important. We can't control a lot in this world, but we can control how we respond to it. We can put out an analysis, I think is so important. And I don't think DSA does that enough. And I don't think our NPC members, myself included, are the kind of public political personas that we really need. I mean, we should be household names. We should be on the news, on CNN. We should be visiting picket lines. And I think there's a real crisis in a vacuum of leadership right now, especially with Bernie, kind of stepping back from his more independent role.
Thanks, Sophia. And Max, go ahead.
In the heyday of the strength of the left in the 20th century, the political economy was such that workers and specially oppressed groups shared common conditions, common neighborhoods, common workplaces, and were bound together organically by their conditions of life. And organizers that then reflected that, it created a cohering force in the working class. And it's one of the points of why Marxism had such faith in the working class's ability to unite and overturn capitalism. That era of political economy has changed dramatically, and those conditions no longer exist in the same way. So to build those kind of communities, that kind of solidarity, that kind of organic connection among people who are oppressed and exploited by this racist capitalist system demands a certain more weight on the actual work of organizers and the amount of time and being embedded in those communities. It takes time. You have to be there year after year. You have to have a consistent program. You have to build structures of organization that are clear and accessible and have on-ramps. We need the time to do that. And that's why the danger of fascism looms so large in terms of defeating MAGA and buying us the time to create those conditions for working class power.
Thank you so much, Max. And let's give a round of applause to all our panelists for the evening, and to yourselves. Myself, I wake up every single morning with the voice of Bernie Sanders in the back of my head asking me, how do you be principled? How do you be strategic? In the Bernie voice. I'll let you imagine that. But I think that's the work we have to do as leftists. And, Bernie, I think, showed us a way, and we are figuring out how to continue it on new terrain.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This has been a really fruitful conversation among members and folks who may not be in DSA. So I really appreciate this back and forth.
Join DSA.
Yes, perennial ask. Just for some additional thanks, especially to our planning committee, Jess, Jack, Simon, Renee, Tiffany, Claire, Paul, Aaron, Alicia, Jeremy for helping us co-chair this event, all the folks involved in planning this event. And also many thanks to the People's Forum for hosting us. As you can see, they're buzzing around to clean up. So please do your part to pick up your things before you leave. But we do have one more brief announcement from Renee, who I'll pass the mic to right now.
Hi, I am a delegate to the National Convention in Chicago. So I am a delegate to the National Convention in Chicago. We have more than 100 people from this chapter who will be in Chicago. We need your help to get us there, to get every one of us there without undue financial hardship. It's expensive. Just the registration is over $200. We've been working on this. We have a goal of $20,000. Where is the bit.ly? We need to get, we need the bit.ly because I want every one of you to take your phones out now to access that site. We have to get out of here, but as soon as you're out or on your way out, put in the information and donate to the scholarship fund. There it is. There it is. Take out those phones now. Take them out now. If you haven't given, give as much as you can now. If you have, thank you. Try to do a little more. Give $10 now. Give $10 next week. Get us all there. We're at $12,000 of a $20,000 goal. You can put us over the top. Do it. Get them out. Get your phones out now. There. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and good night. We do have to be